We will now continue and make responsive adjustments so our layout will look like our final project. Right now our current layout looks alright at small sizes like smartphones, but when we make the browser window wider, we see that nothing changes and it doesn't really look that good. So let's have a look at the final project and see what needs to be changed. The first section is the Jumbotron, and we see that nothing really changes. The content still stays in the center. Our description section acts the same way. Nothing really changes on wider screen sizes. The same is true for our trailer section, where we see the YouTube video scale with the browser window, and it's also true for the showcase section with our carousel scaling. In the next section, the features section, we see that something happens for wider screen sizes. On small screen sizes, the content adapts to a 2-column grid, and for large screen sizes, the content adapts to a 4-column grid. So let's go ahead and code that. In our code, we scroll down to the features section. First, we wrap all of our content except for our heading inside a row, which is a div tag with the class row. Then we need to create columns for these 4 individual parts. So I'll do like this to select all 4 parts, and then we'll create a div tag with the classes call 12 for the initial width spanning all 12 columns, and the class call sm6 to make it span 6 out of 12 columns for small sizes and up, and then the class call lg3 to make the column span 3 out of 12 columns for large devices and up. We'll indent our content a little bit, and then we will create the closing div tag. Let's see this in the browser. Refresh the page. Here we have our features section, and on small screen sizes it adapts to 2 columns, and for large screen sizes it adapts to 4 columns. Great. The next thing we need to adjust is our pricing section here. We can see that for medium screen sizes, which is here, it adapts and has a 3-column layout. So let's go ahead and create that. We scroll a little bit down. We start with creating the row for all the content except for the heading. A div tag with the class row. Then we'll just indent this and create our closing div tag. Now we need to create our 3 columns. I'll just select the first tag in the 3 separate content pieces here, and then we'll go ahead and create a div tag with the class called 12 to make each content span the full width, which is 12 out of 12 columns initially, and then the class call md4 to make each piece span 4 out of 12 columns for medium screen sizes and up. Now we'll just indent each section like this and create the closing div tag and indent the next section like this, close the div tag and indent the final section like this and create the closing div tag. Let's have a look in the browser. We'll refresh page. Here we see our 3 pricing plans, and when we resize the window, we see that for medium devices and larger, it adapts the layout to a 3-column layout. Alright. The next section is our reviews section, and we can see that it also changes. It starts with spanning the full width, and then for medium sizes it spans half of the width, and then for extra large sizes we see a 4-column layout. So let's go ahead and code that. Scroll a little bit down. Once again, start with creating a div tag with the class row for wrapping all of our content except for our heading. Now we need to create columns out of each block quote. We'll just select all of them, and then we'll create a div tag, the class call 12 to span the full width initially, then the class call empty6 to make them span 6 out of 12 columns for medium sizes and up, and finally the class call excel3 to make each column span 3 columns out of 12 on extra large sizes and up. We'll now indent the code and create the closing div tags. Let's see this in the browser. We'll start with the refresh. Here we have our reviews, and there we have our medium breakpoint, and here we have our extra large breakpoint. Great. The next thing we need to change is this sign-up section. We see that the form fields initially spans the full width, and then when we resize the browser, we see that it spans half of the width for small sizes and up. We go back to our code editor, scroll a little bit down. Alright, so we need to create a row outside our 2 form groups here. So we start with a div tag, the class row. Then we'll indent these and create the closing div tag. Then I'll just select these 2 first lines, and now we'll create the classes for our columns. Create a div tag with the class call 12, and then the class call sm6. This will make it span the full width initially, and then span 6 out of 12 columns on small devices and up. We'll indent the code and create the closing div tags. Let's see this in the browser. We start with a refresh. Here we have our newsletter section, and we saw the full width initially, and for small sizes and up we have a 2-column grid for our input fields. Great. The final thing we need to change is our footer. We see that we have 4 rows, which spans the full width initially, and then for small sizes they span the half width, 6 out of 12 columns each, and for large screen sizes they span 3 out of 12 columns each, so we have a 4-column grid. We also have this last section down here under the 4 columns, which also has its own grid around it. So initially it spans the full width, and then on small sizes it spans half of the width each. But then on large sizes we see that the copyright information is spanning 9 out of 12 columns, and the language selector drop down is spanning 3 out of 12 columns for large devices and up. So let's go back to our code editor and let's scroll down. Here we have our footer. So we start with creating a row outside our first 4 columns. A div tag with the class row. Now we need to create our columns, which is a div tag with the class called 12 to span the full width initially, and then call sm6 to make each column span 6 out of 12 columns for small devices and up, and then the class call lg3 to make them span 3 out of 12 columns for large devices and up. We'll indent our code here and create the closing div tag. Do the same here and here. And for the last section as well. Now we need to consider the last line with the copyright information and the language selector drop down. We create a row outside of these elements. Like so. We'll just indent it. Here we have our row. Then we need to create a column here and a column here. We create the div with the classes called 12 to make them span the full width initially, call sm6 to make them span half of the width on small sizes and up, and then for large devices and up. In the first column we wanted to span 9 out of 12 columns, and for our second column we wanted to span 3 out of 12 columns for the large devices and up. Now we just need to indent the code and create the two closing div tags. Like so. Let's see this in the browser. We'll make a refresh. Here we see all of our footer content stacked initially. And then we see for smaller or for small devices and up, they have a 2-column grid for all the content. And then for the large breakpoint, we see the first 4 columns span 3 out of 12 columns each, and the last section we see the copyright information spanning 9 out of 12 columns and the language selector spanning 3 out of 12 columns. This was our responsive adjustments.